Tom lived alone on the edge of a half-developed colony planet, far from the busy cities and glowing towers of the central worlds. His small home stood between the edge of a forest and the remains of an old mining site that had been abandoned years ago. He liked the quiet. He liked the silence of nature more than the constant noise of machines and voices that never stopped. He worked with his hands fixing old things, collecting scrap from the ravine nearby, and trading parts when he needed supplies. He had no family with him and no real friends either, just a simple routine and a heart that had learned to live in silence. One evening, just as the sky turned soft orange and the twin moons began to rise, Tom was out searching near the edge of the ravine where broken metal often fell from forgotten machines. He moved slowly, careful with his steps as the rocks underfoot could give way if not respected. The wind was calm, but it carried a faint sound that made him pause. At first, he thought it was just the wind passing through sharp stones, but then he heard it again. A sound not made by machines or nature. It was a cry. A soft, weak cry that did not belong to any creature he had heard before. He followed the sound past a ridge and saw something lying in the shadows near the rocks. At first glance, it looked like an animal wounded and barely alive. Its body was covered in strange silver fur that shimmered softly even in the low light. Its limbs were slender, but shaped in a way that made them seem not quite natural. Its eyes were half open, glowing faintly like pools of soft light, and when Tom stepped closer, the creature flinched, but did not move. Away Tom knelt beside it and studied the wounds across its side. Deep marks like claws or sharp rocks had torn into its skin, but there was no blood like he would expect. The wounds looked clean but wrong, as if they had healed and broken again over and over. He spoke gently, unsure if it could understand anything he said, but something in its eyes made him feel as if it did. He reached out slowly, letting it smell his hand before touching its side. The creature gave a faint sound like a breath mixed with pain, but did not resist. He could have left it there. He could have walked away, told himself it was just a strange wild animal and not his problem. But something in the way it looked at him stopped him. There was a weight in its eyes, a question of fear and maybe even hope. So Tom did what he rarely did for anyone. He helped. He gathered the creature in his arms, even though it was larger than a normal animal and heavier than it looked. He carried it back to his home step by step, speaking softly to keep it calm, though it never tried to escape. Back in his workshop, he cleared a space near the heater and laid it down on a thick old blanket. He cleaned its wounds using clean water and wrapped them as best as he could. He brought it some crushed nutrient tablets mixed in water, not sure if it would eat or drink. For a while it just watched him without moving, but then slowly it began to drink. Its eyes never left his face, and he felt something in that gaze. It was not just animal instinct. It was understanding. That night he stayed nearby in the same room. He kept the lights low and the doors locked just in case. He could not explain why, but he felt something strange in the air, like something important had begun, and he was standing in the middle of it without knowing why. He slept lightly, waking up often to check if the creature had moved. Each time he looked, it was still there, breathing, steady with those glowing eyes watching the room. The next morning he found the creature standing on weak legs near the window. It had moved during the night but left everything untouched. It turned to look at him as he entered and let out a soft sound, not quite a growl and not quite a word. He stepped closer and spoke calmly, saying he was not going to hurt it. The creature tilted its head as if trying to understand. Then slowly it sat down as if to say it accepted his presence. Days passed and the creature began to heal quickly, much faster than he expected. Its wounds closed and vanished without leaving marks. It began to move around the workshop with ease, sometimes copying what Tom did, watching him closely as he worked on small machines or sorted metal parts. Once he found it staring at itself in a mirror, as if confused by its own reflection. Another time he caught it adjusting a broken heater panel, the same way he had done the day before. The way it observed and learned made it clear that this was not just an animal. There was intelligence and reason behind its actions. One evening, as he sat with a cup of warm liquid, watching the creature lie curled by the heat source, he heard it make a sound that froze him. It said something, not a full sentence but a word. A word in human language, his name. It was faint and strange on its tongue but clear enough. He turned slowly and stared. The creature lifted its head and repeated it. Tom, just that. His name. Spoken not as a parrot would speak, but as someone reaching across a great distance trying to connect. He stood up unsure what to say. The creature looked tired but calm. It lowered its head and closed its eyes. As it drifted into sleep, he whispered. A quiet question asking what it truly was. The only answer he got was a flicker of light across its fur, like stars passing through clouds. Did not sleep much that night. He sat in silence, wondering what kind of story he had stepped into. The stars outside shone bright and distant, and he had the strange feeling that somewhere far beyond them, something or someone was waiting, watching, and maybe listening. He had rescued a dying animal or so, he thought, but now nothing seemed simple anymore. Something had come into his life from beyond the stars, wearing the shape of a helpless creature, and everything was starting to change. He just did not know how much yet. The days passed slowly, but each one brought something new, something strange, and something that made Tom feel like he was standing at the edge of a secret, too big to understand yet. The creature he had brought home no longer looked weak or helpless. It had gained strength, but what grew even faster than its body was the sharp light behind its eyes. There was thought in that light and awareness, like someone was looking back at him, not with fear or instinct, but with questions and decisions of its own. Tom had never seen anything like it before, and though he had read about strange animals found on other planets and even heard of creatures with mild intelligence, this one felt different. It had stopped acting like a beast and started behaving like something that understood rules, like it was learning how to live in his world by watching quietly. It no longer needed help to walk or eat. It walked carefully around the room sometimes, standing near him for long minutes just observing whatever he was doing. One morning he was fixing an old scanner panel, its circuits half dead and cables twisted and rusted. He noticed the creature standing at the corner of the room, watching with its glowing eyes wide and focused. When he dropped a tool by mistake and bent down to grab it, the creature suddenly moved, stepped closer, and with a careful touch used one of its long limbs to hand it to him. The way it moved, the way it held the tool, not like an animal, but like a being that knew what it meant to give and to assist. Tom thanked it quietly, unsure if it understood the word, but the creature gave a slow nod as if responding. That was the first time he was truly sure that something far beyond animal instinct lived inside this being. There was intelligence, yes, but also purpose and something more than survival. There was a calm, silent connection growing between them, a kind of trust built not from words, but from presence and action. It began to respond to small commands, not with obedience, but with understanding. When he asked it to stay, it did. When he said come, it came. Not every time, and not like training a dog, but like someone choosing to listen and show that they heard him. And then came the moment that shattered every belief he had about what this creature might be. That night, while Tom was checking the outer systems and making notes about heat levels, he heard movement behind him and turned, expecting the soft steps of pause, but what he saw made his breath catch. The creature was standing near the wall, its body stretching slightly, its shape shifting, its limbs growing longer and thinner, its back straightening, until for just a few seconds it looked like a human silhouette made of silver light and shifting skin. Then it collapsed back into its previous form and lay down, breathing fast, like the effort had cost something. Tom stood frozen and unsure what to say. He stepped closer slowly and knelt beside it. The creature looked at him, its eyes now dim but still watching. It did not run or growl or show fear. Instead, it spoke again in a voice soft and broken, like someone trying to remember how to speak. The word it said this time was not his name, but something else, something simple. Friend, that one word changed everything. Tom sat down beside it, unsure how to react, but deeply aware that he was no longer caring for an animal. He asked the creature softly what it was, what it wanted, what it needed, but it only looked at him with that same quiet light and repeated the word again. Friend, the next day when Tom woke up, the creature was gone from the floor, but he found it sitting near the entrance door, looking outside as if waiting. When he joined it, it turned, and this time it spoke more clearly, not perfectly, but enough to say another sentence. I came here to see if you are kind. Tom stared at it, his mouth dry, his heart racing. He asked what that meant. The creature looked down and said nothing more, but the meaning was already shaking his thoughts. He began to understand that this was no accident. This creature had not crashed or wandered into danger by mistake. It had come here for a reason, and somehow that reason was tied to him. Later that evening, after hours of silence broken only by the wind outside and the soft buzz of machines, the creature spoke again. Its voice clearer now, though still strange in rhythm and tone. It said its name was Lyra, and she was not from this world, not even from this galaxy. She was sent to observe, to see with her own eyes if humans were what the others feared, or what they hoped. Tom listened without speaking, letting the words sink in like water on dry ground. Lyra told him she had taken a form that would appear weak and helpless because she wanted to know how a stranger would be treated when no one was watching, and when no reward was expected. She had chosen to look like something between animal and being, hoping to test not minds, but hearts. He asked her why she had not spoken earlier. She answered simply, because I needed to see, not hear, your kindness. She told him that others of her kind were not far, and they had been watching the same way, but from the shadows, waiting to know if humans deserved to be left alone or judged without mercy. Tom felt cold inside, not from fear, but from the weight of what she had revealed. He had always thought he was alone, just one small person, living on a quiet world. Now he was hearing that something greater had been watching and deciding, and that somehow his actions had shaped that decision. He could barely believe it, but he could not deny the truth in her eyes and the way she had trusted him from the beginning. Lyra stood slowly, her form steady and graceful. She said the test was almost complete, but there was still danger. Some of her kind did not believe in second chances. They had seen other species rise and fall, destroy their worlds and each other, and they were ready to erase threats before they grew too large. She looked at him and asked softly, do you think your people are worth saving? He did not answer right away. He thought of the world he had left behind, the cities full of greed, the leaders who cared more for power than people. But then he thought of the small things, the kindnesses he had seen in strangers, the sacrifices, the hope, the stories of courage that never made it to headlines. He looked at her and said, I think we are not perfect, but we are trying. Sometimes we fail, but sometimes we rise, and those moments are worth saving. Lyra gave a nod, slow and thoughtful, then turned to the stars above and whispered a word in her own tongue, a word that sounded like a song in the wind. Tom knew something bigger than him had begun, and the next step might not be safe or easy, but he also knew one thing with certainty. The creature he had saved was not just a test. She was a voice, a message, a choice. And now that choice was his to make. The sky above the forest had turned a strange color, like deep violet mixed with streaks of gold, as if something far beyond the planet's edge was stirring and shifting. Tom stood outside his small home, watching the sky with quiet breath, while Lyra sat beside the doorway, her silver form still and glowing under the dim light of the moons. The world around them was calm, but something in the air felt thick and strange, as if a storm was rising that carried no wind, no sound, but only pressure. That morning Lyra had not spoken much, but her eyes had watched the distance, her attention drawn to a point beyond the trees. She had said few words, but each one carried weight. They are coming. Tom had not asked who she meant, because something in him already knew. Her people, the ones she had mentioned, the ones who watched and judged, and decided were no longer silent. They had seen enough, and now they were coming to speak to him, or to Lyra, or maybe to both by midday. The temperature shifted slightly, not enough for machines to notice, but enough for the body to feel. The birds of the forest had gone quiet, the wind had vanished, and a light shimmer danced across the sky like the surface of water touched by invisible fingers. Lyra rose without a word and walked toward the clearing behind the house. Tom followed her, heart steady, but unsure, ready to face something he could not understand yet. They waited for some time in silence, and then, from the edge of the trees, 3 shapes appeared. Not walking, not flying, but gliding like shadows pulled forward by thoughts, not by feet. Their forms were unclear, always shifting, not quite solid, not quite air. Their faces, hidden behind smooth masks, without eyes or mouths, but still somehow watching deeply. Lyra stepped forward, her voice calm but firm, as she greeted them in her language, which sounded like rain and wind blended into music. The shapes did not speak aloud, but Tom heard their voices inside his mind, not like whispers, but like memories being replayed. They spoke in unison, their thoughts shared as one. The test has reached its final moment. The subject has performed as expected. Now the result must be judged. Tom looked at Lyra, who turned her eyes to him with a softness that felt like farewell. She nodded gently before stepping aside, letting the shapes approach him. The air around him grew heavier, as if time had slowed down and space had folded. Then the voices spoke again inside his mind, this time aimed at him. You found a dying creature. You chose to help without reward. Why? He answered simply, without trying to sound wise or clever. Because it was in pain, and I could help. The shape shifted slightly, but said nothing. The question came again, but with different words. You saw something strange, something unknown. You had no reason to trust it. Why did you choose care over fear? Tom breathed slowly and replied, because being afraid is not a reason to turn away from someone who needs help. Fear is just a feeling, but kindness is a choice. There was silence for a moment, and the next question came more direct. If it had been a trap, if the creature had harmed you, would you regret your choice? He shook his head and said, no, I would still choose the same. If I stopped being kind just to protect myself, then I would be someone else, someone I don't want to be. The 3 shapes began to move in slow circles around him, their presence thick like fog, pressing against his skin yet not touching. Their voices came softer now. You speak with heart, but hearts deceive. What makes you believe your kind deserves to exist? Tom thought of the worst of humanity, the wars, the greed, the lies, and the cruelty he had seen in his own lifetime. He thought of how many times people had failed each other, but then he remembered the small moments, the strangers who helped, the voices that stood up when others stayed silent, the people who gave when they had little, and the stories of love and bravery that passed through generations, not because they were perfect, but because they were true. He looked up at the sky and said, we are not perfect, we are full of mistakes, and sometimes we break what we build, but we also heal, we also protect, and we learn and try again. If that is not enough, then maybe we don't deserve everything, but we deserve a chance. For a long moment, nothing happened. The shape stood still, the sky shimmered, the silence grew so deep it rang in his ears. Then one of the shapes began to pulse softly with light and stepped forward. It raised a hand not shaped like human fingers, but like flowing liquid, and pointed at Lyra. The test was not only to observe kindness. The test was to see if it would continue in the face of loss. We must remove her. Begin again. Another test, another place. Tom stepped forward, without thinking, placing himself between Lyra and the being. He raised his arms, though they were useless against such power, and said, you can't take her, not like this, not after all this. She is not just your test anymore. She is a person, and she made her choice to trust me, to show herself, and live here with hope. I will not let you erase that. The air grew hot with invisible force, the ground trembled slightly, but Tom did not move. He looked at the pulsing light and said, "If you want to take her, you will have to take me too. Because she matters, and not just to you and your plans, she matters to me." Behind him he heard Lyra's breath catch, and the light around her began to rise, glowing brighter until it cast a warm silver hue. Across the whole clearing she stepped forward, placed a hand gently on Tom's shoulder, and turned to face the shapes. Her voice now was clear, strong, and full of fire. "I have seen enough. I have felt enough. This world is not without flaw, but it is not without light. You sent me here to see with my own eyes, and I have. Let my words be my report." The beings shifted again, their forms dimming and brightening like clouds lit from inside. They did not speak, but the wind returned and the pressure faded. One of them moved close and placed its strange hand over Lyra's heart, and then over Tom's chest. Then they turned and slowly faded into the trees, their forms dissolving like mist under the morning sun. Tom stood still, not sure if it was over or just beginning, but Lyra remained by his side. She looked up at him with something like a smile and said softly, "Your answer has been heard. Now they must decide what to do next. But I think your words have reached them in a way they did not expect." Tom nodded slowly, his chest tight with the weight of everything that had just passed. The world felt quiet again, but not empty. It felt like something had been seen, something had been shared, and now the waiting had begun. He looked at the sky once more and whispered a hope, not just for himself, but for all those who lived on the little blue worlds scattered through the stars. Stars above the forest shimmered with a strange brightness that night, as if they too were waiting for a decision yet to be made. Tom sat on the flat stone behind his small house, his eyes turned upward, but his thoughts heavy with all that had happened. Lyra stood beside the old tree that leaned just slightly to one side, its roots tangled with the earth like ancient fingers. Her body was still, but her mind was far away, reaching into distances that no human could touch. Since the moment the judges had vanished into the forest, neither of them had spoken much. There was nothing left to say and everything to feel. Tom had never thought one simple act of kindness could carry such weight or lead to a point where the fate of his entire species would hang by invisible threads, woven by those who never spoke with mouths or wrote with hands. Yet here he was standing in the middle of that very moment, with no way back. When Lyra finally turned her gaze toward him, her eyes were dimmer than usual, but her voice was clear. "They have not given a final word yet. That is not how it works among them. They move slowly through time and thought, but once they choose the path that cannot be undone, they are not angry. They are uncertain. That is why they have not left the skies above your world. They are watching not with eyes but with questions." Tom nodded as he listened. He felt the truth in her words, the kind of truth that could not be argued or avoided. He stood and joined her under the tree, his voice quiet but steady. "If there's still a chance, then I won't stop speaking for us. I'll keep showing them what it means to be human." Lyra looked at him with something close to sorrow in her expression, and whispered, "Your voice may not be enough anymore. Others have arrived not from the stars, but from the edge of their council. They believe judgment must not be delayed, and that delay is a sign of weakness. They are not here to ask questions. They are here to take action." Before Tom could speak, the ground beneath them gave off a slight pulse, and from the edge of the forest, where shadows gathered even in daylight, a figure began to form. It was taller than the judges from before, with a body like fire wrapped in smoke. Its face was hidden behind a sharp mask that shifted shape with every movement. The air grew tight and full of pressure, and even Lyra stepped back with a low breath. This was not a watcher. This was an enforcer. It moved with silence, but its message rang across the clearing without words, without sound. Lyra stepped forward, her arms raised not in fear but in peace. She spoke clearly, though her voice carried tension. "This world is not yet judged. You have no right to act before the final thought has passed." The being did not speak, but its power surged forward, pushing the grass flat and bending the air. Tom felt it pass through his chest like a storm without wind. The enforcer pointed a hand not at Lyra, but at the sky, and in a sudden moment, the stars began to bend and shift above them, not falling but stretching. A beam of quiet energy descended toward the earth, stopping just above the ground and hovering in place. Lyra's voice rose sharper now. That is the cleansing beam. It is not meant for use without final order. This act breaks the oldest code. Do you wish to be the one who brings war to a race that has not struck back? Still there was no reply, only the slow hum of energy building in the above. Tom stepped forward, not knowing what power he had, if any, but refusing to step aside. He shouted across the clearing, his voice rough and raw. If you think destroying us makes you right, then maybe you never cared about judgment at all. Maybe you only wanted to feel clean by burning what you didn't understand. Lyra reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder, her touch soft, but pulsing with warmth. She looked into his eyes and said, I will stop it, but it will cost me. Tom grabbed her hand and shook his head. No. You don't have to do this alone. We started this together. We finish it together. She smiled, and the light in her eyes returned, not just with power, but with emotion. She turned and walked toward the beam, her body rising slightly off the ground as her form began to shift again. Not just into her silver light, but into something larger, something ancient and beautiful. Her voice rose like wind through mountains and rivers through deep caves. She spoke in her own language and in a voice that echoed across the sky. I claim the right of last voice. I stand for this world. I give my full being in proof of its value. Let my light be witness and my end be measure. The enforcer paused for the first time, its body shifting uncertainly. The beam above flickered. Tom stepped beside her, not as a being of power, but as a man who knew that what she gave was more than light. He shouted once more to the figure across the clearing. She is not just an observer. She lived here. She trusted. She gave everything. That's what humans do when we care. We give even when it hurts. The beam trembled, then began to pull upward slowly, as if someone had changed their mind, but had not yet spoken it. The enforcer turned, and its mask stopped shifting for a single moment. Then without a sound it vanished into the trees, and the pressure lifted. Lyra sank to the ground, her energy flickering, her breath shallow. Tom rushed to her side and held her close. You did it, he whispered. You stopped it. She nodded weakly and said, not just me, not just light. Your words reached where mine could not. They saw it, not just in me, in you. In both of us above them. The stars returned to their places, and the air grew soft again. The forest whispered gently as if in approval, and the distant sky held no more fire, only silence and deep peace. Tom looked down at her form resting in his arms, her glow dim but still. There, he whispered, stay with me. You're not done. You still have more to see. She closed her eyes, but her lips moved, and her voice came as soft as the breeze. If I fade, let them know. I chose to believe. I chose your world. I chose your kind, and with that the light around her shimmered once more before settling into stillness like the last flame of a candle waiting to return. The sky held its breath, as if time itself had paused for a final decision. The wind moved through the tall grass with a gentleness that felt like hands brushing over the earth. Tom sat with Lyra's head resting in his lap, her silver form quiet, and still the glow of her body dim, but not gone. He looked down at her face, peaceful in the silence, and he wished for a power he did not have, something greater than words, something strong enough to protect her. From the weight of her choice, he whispered her name, hoping she would open her eyes again, not as a being from the stars, but as the one who had walked beside him through fear and wonder, and now through sacrifice. She had stood between a weapon and a world, and offered herself as proof of humanity's worth, not with pride, but with hope and love, that no test could fully measure above them. The stars began to change again, but this time the change brought no fear, A gentle light spread across the sky, not bright like a fire, but soft like moonlight across still water. The air shifted, and from the edge of the sky something began to appear. Not ships, not shadows, but shapes made of thought and memory, the presence of those who had watched from behind the veil of time and distance. They came not with judgment, but with answer. Lyra's body lifted slightly without Tom's help, her light pulsing once more, not with pain, but with peace. Her voice came as a whisper, not in his ears, but in his heart. They have spoken. The choice is made. The earth is spared. Humanity is marked not for destruction, but for growth. The path is still long, but the door remains open. Tom closed his eyes, as relief washed over him like warm rain. He had feared this ending would come with fire, but instead it came with light. He looked up at the shapes above, and for a moment he felt something pass through him, not a voice, not a word, but a feeling of acceptance, as if an unseen counsel had leaned forward from the stars and nodded. Without speaking, Lyra lowered herself back to the ground, and her glow returned gently. Tom helped her sit up, holding her with both hands, as if she might vanish into the night. She smiled at him, a soft, tired smile that held gratitude and something deeper. She spoke slowly now, as if every word was part of a farewell written not in speech but in truth. My time here is ending. I was not meant to stay forever. My body was shaped for your world, but my essence belongs to places you cannot yet reach. I came to test, but I found more than data. I found someone who chose kindness without reward. You did not see a creature. You saw a soul. That changed everything. Tom shook his head, not ready to let her go, not yet. He asked if there was a way for her to remain, if not as she was then, in some other form, something that could live among the forests and winds of his world. But Lyra looked at him with soft eyes and said, some lights must return to their source. My people will carry my report to places far beyond here. They will remember your name. And more than that, they will remember your act. She stood slowly, her feet barely touching the ground, her form now glowing fully again. Around her the trees seemed to bend slightly, as if drawn by her presence, and the stars above began to swirl gently. A path of light formed between the earth and the sky, thin and endless, like a bridge between dreams and reality. Tom felt the ache rise in his chest, the ache of losing someone who had never truly belonged, yet had made a place in his heart. He walked with her to the center of the clearing, where the beam of judgment had once burned, and now only peace remained. Lyra turned and looked at him one last time, her silver skin shining with every color the sky could hold. She reached out and touched his hand, her fingers cool and light. Remember this. Every act of kindness echoes far beyond what the eye can see. What you did may seem small, but it reached stars I cannot name. That is the power of being human. That is your strength. He nodded, his voice caught in his throat, but his eyes full of everything he wanted to say. Thank you, he whispered, not just for the peace, not just for the answers, but for believing when it mattered most. She stepped onto the path of light and slowly began to rise, not like flight, but like memory rising in the heart. The stars opened to receive her, and for one brief moment, the sky was filled with shapes and colors unknown to any world. The vision lasted only a breath, and then it was gone, leaving behind a quiet that felt sacred. Tom stood alone in the clearing, the wind returning, the forest waking, and the earth alive again. The light had faded, but in his chest something burned softly, not with sorrow, but with meaning. He turned back to his home, each step slow but sure, and as he crossed the threshold, he looked at the place where Lyra had first rested her wounded form, and smiled. In the weeks that followed, the world did not change in obvious ways. There were no ships in the sky, no announcements from distant stars. Life continued as before, but Tom knew something had shifted far beyond the reach of news or systems. Humanity had been seen, not judged, not destroyed. Seen. Sometimes at night he would walk to the clearing and look up, waiting not with fear but with a quiet hope. He would remember her voice, her words, the warmth in her touch, and the way she had spoken of his kind with belief. And though she never Returned in body, he felt her presence in the stillness of the trees and the silence between the stars. Built a small marker in the center of the clearing, made of stone and metal, with no name, only a message carved by hand. It reads simply, "Kindness is never wasted." The words held everything that had passed and everything still to come, and far beyond the edge of sight, in a place without time or gravity, Lyra stood once more, not as an observer, not as a test, but as a voice among many, speaking the story of one human who chose to save a creature without knowing it was a mirror for all of humanity. And that story, like all true stories, did not end, but became part of something larger, carried by stars and remembered. In silence, the end.